Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about some less common documents employers might be requesting from you. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together with the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about some less common documents that employers might be requesting from you. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Well, we've talked many times about the kind of standard documents, your resume, your cover letter, your writing sample. So today we want to talk about some less common things you might be asked for when you're applying for a legal job. What type of stuff have you seen here?
Well, a diversity statement is something that's fairly common, and anyone can really add one to an application, or the employer might request one. They might have a specific position like a 1L fellowship or a pro bono fellow. There might be something where you're applying more than just, a summer associate or some kind of summer position. And so it's specific. And so they may ask for some kind of statement that goes with that, for example.
Let's kind of talk about both of those. What is the diversity statement? I mean, I know particularly now people have a lot of concerns and questions about what's allowable and not allowable and what they can say and what the firms can ask for. What is this?
So it's sort of ever changing, and I find them not very specific. The prompts are usually very general. And for example, there can be like a diversity career fair where you're sort of naming what your diversity is or why you're there. It's not like you need to fit into one of these 5 categories or you need to be racially diverse. It usually won't say you're required to be this in order to apply for this. It's self-selecting. And I think these diversity statements are sort of like that too. Generally, you're sort of saying what category makes you diverse in some way and how you're going to contribute to diversity at the firm is really the main point. So it's not so much about necessarily your personal experience, but how you're going to bring your background to create a more diverse environment at the firm. And it's sort of up to you what you're comfortable with in terms of whether you think you should be applying for this or you feel like you fit in. They're not going to disqualify you, whoever you are, from applying for it. So that's kind of what you want to get across. Now, some of them may have specific prompts that say, here's what we want to learn about you, or here's what we want this statement to be. And you should follow exactly what they're looking for if they give you specifics.
Let's kind of back up a little bit. What are employers generally looking for overall that I think these documents ideally should be sort of pointing toward?
I think that specifically law firms want to increase their diversity generally if we're talking about these specific documents. And there might be certain groups of students that they have not been strong in recruiting before, so maybe they are trying to look in those certain areas. But I would say they want somebody who is going to, again, like contribute to the firm, in sort of a well-rounded way. They want you to be able to write a statement that explains that, in a succinct way. So you need to get that across in this document. And it's not the same as a admissions essay, which might be multiple pages and might go into your whole background. You kind of want to talk about what this has to do with the firm and where you're going to be working and the work you're going to do.
So I guess if you have any sort of background, maybe cultural affinity groups or anything like that would probably be worth mentioning.
Definitely. And that's something you want to have in your resume because that kind of signals that you are in that group, work with that group, care about that group. So that's always good. So you want to have those things very clearly listed. And you want to say what your involvement's been. I think being involved is just as important as your general background, that you've done things, you've contributed. And also to be clear, I think people sometimes mix up community service work with diversity, which is 2 different categories. And I think some of these statements I've seen just really focus on pro bono work. And to me, that's different and can miss the point of a lot of these. It's not really necessarily the same thing.
I mean, I think with the diversity one, I haven't seen a lot of these, obviously, because I'm not on that side of the table or hadn't been on that side of the table when I was working at a law firm. I mean, it seems to me, like with most things, you want to be very clear about what story are you telling? What is this background or characteristic or whatever it is that you think would positively impact the firm? Why are you the right person? What evidence can you use to support that? And then that's it.
Exactly. I think that these can go off on a tangent, I've noticed, and sort of miss the point of if I were reading it from the firm point of view, does this person want to work at a for-profit organization that works
Right.
for big companies and does that kind of corporate work? Because some of these statements can come across like, oh, you want to do public interest work and work here for the summer and make some money. And I think that's not really what you want to get across in these documents. I think people just go off on, they're really excited about the stuff they're writing about. Just remember who your reader is and what the job is.
I think that's always good advice. If nothing else, in addition to whatever diversity you're bringing to the table, they're also looking for some type of reasonable cultural fit at the firm. And I 100% agree if everything you're sending is like, I love like solving the world's problems and I want to save the world. And oh, by the way, I'm also applying for this big law job. That doesn't really work.
Exactly. So I think if you talk about work you've done to facilitate more people with your background getting into law firm work, that gets that point across. Like maybe you've helped organize panels with the law firm for your affinity group or something like that. That all makes sense to me. But if it's just about community service work you've done, I feel like that can kind of miss the point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's in the framing. It also reads to me a little bit like why people are hiring 1Ls at firms, which is that they want somebody who's going to be a cheerleader. So, you're going to go back to the school and be like, oh, it's such a great summer. These people are really great. Definitely, you guys should consider working there. I think it's the same thing in the diversity context. Whoever it is that you can talk to that maybe the average person at the firm can't talk to that they would love to recruit, that's powerful.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And, you should definitely remember that. Let's say that you're writing a statement about applying for a specific 1L position. Again, make sure that it talks about your involvement on campus or how you plan to be involved in your whole kind of law school career. But if it's just talking about how you've done really well and had really good academic success, that's not really what they're looking for in a 1L. They want somebody who's involved, who's going to talk about the firm on campus and is going to get people excited and is like a very outgoing kind of person. And I think it is the same thing with the diversity fellowships too. They want someone who's going to go back and be able to talk about their experience at the firm.
Definitely, I agree. Let's talk a little bit about these other fellowships in the documents. If you are applying, say, for a pro bono fellowship, is that a different take?
Yeah, so that's an example of where I think you can be open about your interests. And even some firms beyond summer associates do have 1-year fellowships for somebody who just works on their pro bono work. And so some of those people do end up being associates, but I think it's completely fine to want to do that for a year. And again, they want someone who's going to be outgoing and talk about this great pro bono work and get them good press about it. So in that case, obviously it makes sense to highlight the work that you've done that's in the pro bono area and hopefully have that experience. So in that case, I think it's fine. Just make sure that you understand what the position is and what you're trying to get across to them.
Right. I think that's the key here. Like, you really understand, like, what are you selling? I know lawyers don't love to sell, but this is definitely a marketing and sales type of thing of, all right, what's in my background that I can mine for the pro bono application? What's for this other position? I don't know. It might be a little weird. Do you think it's weird if you apply for the pro bono fellowship and also to be an associate?
No, I don't think so. I've definitely seen it before. I can think of pro bono fellows who ended up just becoming regular associates. They just wanted to do that work for a little while and they realized the advantage of working at a firm a lot of times. Maybe it wasn't what they were planning, but they realized that there were good resources and training and they will get to do some pro bono work down the line. obviously it's a luxury to get a firm salary
Right.
and just do pro bono work. Like, that's not something that most people are going to get the chance to do. But I think a lot of this is your political savvy at the firm and you're being able to get to know the right people and find a place for yourself if that's what you're looking for.
All right. Well, let's focus just on these kind of documents before we get into some other things you might be asked for. So, are there anything that you think this stuff should not include or not reference, whether it's for the diversity statements, whether it's for some other type of fellowship or whatnot?
So I think you always want to be positive. So if you're talking about diversity, you want to highlight the things you think that they're doing well in relation to diversity, or if you see they have these affinity groups, I don't think you want to reference anything that they're not doing well, or you feel like diversity is a real struggle here, and I'm going to help you out or something. And that's like in all areas. I think you want to be positive. I think you want to talk about again, positive qualities. I think this is a situation where people sometimes talk about sort of difficult experiences they've had. And I'm not saying across the board you can't talk about that, or like the struggles of being somebody different from, let's say, everybody else at your school, that everyone else was a different race than you, and here's the struggles with that. I think it's okay to reference it, but you don't want this document to appear like it's a big sad story about your life, or talk about anything too personal. Keep it professional and make sure you're just hitting on certain points. And again, keeping it short, you shouldn't really get into anything too much.
Yeah, I think shorter is generally better. I'm just thinking of somebody I know in law school who was actually a friend of mine who was a very, very white man who applied for the law review and wrote his diversity statement about being, I think he technically was a libertarian, but whatever, about his political views. And then he got on the law review and then he was very concerned that it was only because of his diversity statement. Can people bring in stuff like that? Is that okay?
That doesn't seem like great judgment to me, but it also would depend on the school or the firm, or what they're looking for. Maybe there are places where that would fly. Generally, I would stay away from those areas. And even if you know what you think someone's sort of political affiliation is, I would be careful. I would stay neutral and not really hit on things that you think are going to be controversial, because you don't know who's going to be reading it and you don't know what they think.
Yeah, he told me that and I was like, oh, that's an interesting take.
There's people who are in certain clubs or on certain law school activities that clearly say what their feelings are. And so I assume if you're doing that and you put that on your resume, you want everyone to know this is what I believe. And you're willing to lose a job over that, right? Because there might be people who immediately see these things and just say, that's not going to fit in here.
I mean, I think that's always an interesting thing to think about. When I was applying for clerkships, my writing sample was about asylum law and whether sexual orientation should be covered, which at the time it wasn't. Now it is. I was correct. It should have been. But it was interesting because there were judges where I was submitting this. And I'm like, how are they going to react to this? But in one case, at least I got an interview with a very conservative judge, which I was shocked by. So you just never really know.
And you went into it knowing, like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and it might be taken in different ways, and you were okay with that. So then I think it's
Right.
fine. I just think you should think about that.
Yeah, I was definitely like, there will probably be people who look at the title of this and are like, oh, that is not my person. And that's
Yeah,
fine, so probably not.
exactly. And I think that makes sense. I just feel like with these sort of short little snippets or whatever, there's just no need to get really controversial.
I agree. And I think also, I mean, like we say, with everything, you have to make sure there are no mistakes in this. You cannot have typos. It needs to be just to the point, crisp, easy to read, not going off on a bunch of tangent, not talking about like things that are not relevant. Just make your best case. You're applying to be an attorney. You need to be concise, make your best case, present a little bit of evidence, and then move on.
It shouldn't be like a long narrative. I think
Right.
that is where people get stuck because they take these prompts very personally. But I think what you need to remember is the prompt isn't really your whole personal story. It's like, how does your story fit in with you working at this law firm?
Right. Like, what
Um,
can you do for us,
yeah,
basically?
exactly. And the thing I always remind people of who write multiple pages and they just insist that it has to be that long because they could not get it all across, that if it's so long that no one's going to read it, that is completely pointless. And you might as well have not turned it in at all. So the most important thing is that they're going to read it. So it needs to be less than a page.
Yeah, I agree. And compelling, because you need to be a compelling writer if you're going to work as an attorney.
Well, and that's the other thing. This is just an example of your writing. Another part of it is, yes, you should convey all of these things, but it should be written well and easy to read and to the point.
I agree. All right, well, let's move on and talk about some other things that I have seen, I'm sure you've seen, or that I've been asked for. Let's talk about references.
So personally, I have not seen a lot of references looked. I know that students just turn them in sometimes with their documents. And there might be employers who ask for them, and then it completely makes sense that you would turn them in. I usually like adding something that just says references on request. All the references I have personally ever seen are you give somebody a phone number or an email and they call the person up. And actually, I think most of the places I've worked, there was a rule that they had to call them up and that it wasn't supposed to be in writing and it was supposed to be a conversation that someone took notes on. That's different. You should follow what they're asking for. So if that's how they want it, you should do it that way. But generally, if you're going to get references or they ask you for references, I think you want to tell the person who's writing it their certain points. Or I know some people have the students write the references and then the person just signs it. So I think it depends on the person that you're asking.
Yeah, I never had any firms ask for like a letter of recommendation like you would get for school. I definitely had at least one place ask for references. And frankly, I decided it was such a hassle because I was like, I don't want to deal with this, that I just withdrew my application.
So you didn't have anybody even ask you for somebody that they needed to call?
I had one place ask for it as part of the callback process. And I was just like, this seems like a real hassle to me. And it became like a whole thing for various reasons. And I was just like, oh, this is not worth it.
I think places that have very set HR rules usually require them. So I think it's just what their policy is. But letters of recommendation might come up more if it is like a fellowship or something. Like I bet if you're applying for some kind of pro bono position, they want to talk to someone you've worked with, in the pro bono area about your skills and things like that. So I think it would come up more specific to certain jobs and things like that. But I think it's a good idea to have some people that you could go to if there's something you really want and they need references.
And clerkships, you need references. I definitely had professors call people up and things like that. And vice versa. Some of them got phone calls from judges that were considering hiring me before they did the interview.
Also, along those lines, you should definitely have talked to the person first because you'd be surprised. I have seen people give not totally positive references for people, which really surprises me. It seems like something that if you're giving a name, they would automatically be saying something nice.
But I saw that. Yeah, I saw that on the
surprising.
clerkship side because the judge would come in and be like, wow, this is definitely not a person they should have put down.
So make sure you're comfortable and also that they're not just like a loose cannon. Sometimes it's not really about you and your relationship. It's just the kind of person who just says whatever's on the top of their mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think you definitely want to clarify. Anybody you put down as a reference for anything, you have to make sure that they have said yes. You want to make sure they're enthusiastic. You want to make sure ideally that they know what this job is and what they should be talking about, all that kind of stuff.
They remember you.
Exactly.
They're not in your family.
Right, exactly. Don't put your mother, maybe if you worked at your father's law firm, but even then, put somebody else at the firm, not your parent.
Yeah, exactly. Even if they have a different last name, I know from experience it will come out.
So just think about these things. It probably is worth thinking if you know you're going into an application process, it probably makes sense to at least think of a couple of people you might ask and then maybe ask them if you feel like you're going to need them.
Exactly. And maybe a couple of people that are in different areas. Maybe one is a professor and one is a former employer or something like that.
Yeah. I was remembering this bizarre situation where I reached out to somebody I'd worked with over the summer. And he was like, well, I can't give you a reference because I want to take you on a date. And I'm like, wow, this is really awkward.
Oh.
That was actually one of the main reasons I was like, I'm not dealing with this.
That's a twist.
Yeah, no, it was a definite twist. I was like, that is not the answer I was expecting.
But see, that's why you'd have to talk to the person.
And early, because you need to have other options if one doesn't pan out because they apparently want to date you.
Yeah. Imagine if they'd said that to the employer. Yeah.
Oh my God, no, the whole thing. I was just like, I can't deal with this. Anyway, what about some other stuff? I don't think I've personally seen this really in the legal context, but I know it's pretty common in other areas, friends who are designers and whatnot. Do you see ever people having to do some type of work product or project or anything to like show that they can do something?
So I've definitely heard that. Yeah, I agree. Not as much in law firms, although I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes something in law firms because it seems like they're always 10 or 15 years behind,
True.
like the business world or the startup world, and then decide that they're going to do that. But I know Google and Facebook and all the tech companies definitely make you go through a process and they may ask you to work on something. And I know people that have dropped out of the interview process because this was taking too long. And I think you can have your own boundaries. If you feel like you're actually doing free work for them through the interview process, I get it. But I think if it seems reasonable and, a lot of these things can be relevant to the job, and maybe you'll learn something about them through doing the process. I think you just, again, want to make sure you understand what they expect of you. You understand how long it should take. You understand what the turnover time should be. You understand who you need to send it to. It's just like when we talk about getting a work assignment. Just make sure you know what you need to do and when.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think something reasonable is like, okay, fine, I'm willing to do that. But I definitely have friends who are designers or whatnot. And then it's like, oh, you just designed our new website. Thanks. We're not going to hire you because we don't need it anymore.
Yeah. No, I've heard a lot about people feeling like they're doing free work. But I think if it's something that's going to take an hour of your time, that seems like part of an interview process. And that seems okay to me.
Yeah. And I think some firms are getting more creative about what they're asking for. And some of that is probably like decent HR practice. I mean, they were also super late to the game in terms of like behavioral interviewing and stuff like that. It was very commonplace in other industries for a long time before finally lawyers were like, oh, maybe we should do more than just like, hey, what's your favorite like law school class?
I was thinking that exactly. So I think I would expect some of this stuff to become more standard in law firm jobs. So just be prepared and make sure you're clear on what is expected of you throughout the interview process.
Yeah. And I think overall, like I said, I think what employers are really looking for, and this is always the touch point to come back to if you're not sure like how you should frame something. Do you understand this job? Is it going to be a reasonable fit for what you're looking for? Are you easy to work with? Can you be trusted in front of clients? And can you learn enough to be competent? You don't have to know everything, but like, are you a person who likes to learn things and wants to be a competent attorney? I think that is fundamentally what firms are really looking for.
I totally agree. And I think an area of this where students can go wrong is they want to put their best foot forward and talk about all the things they've done that make them perfect for this and what they're going to contribute. And to me, especially if we're talking about a summer associate position or a first year associate position, you should know very little and you should make
Right.
it clear that you know very little. You are there to learn. You know where you are on this food chain, which is how law firms are. They're very hierarchical. So you know that you're going to be there on the bottom to learn, to help, to do whatever they need because you're coming in as a brand new person who doesn't have experience in this area. So I think that they don't mean to, but I think some students can come across like a little kind of know-it-all and ahead of themselves by talking about all the things they've done that are relevant. So I'd just be careful. Make sure they know you're there to learn, like you said, and that you'll be a good colleague. You want
Right.
to contribute.
Yeah, I think humble and like a good colleague is a way to look at this. Well, before we wrap up, like why are they even asking for this extra step for some of these positions? What do you think is in it for them?
I think some of it is to see how you're going to answer these kind of questions because a lot of these things are unclear. Like I said, a diversity statement is not a set thing that everyone does exactly the same way. And so I think they want to see who you are, how you choose to answer this. And especially when it's for a specific position like a fellowship or being a 1L, I think that your resume and your cover letter can be kind of standard and can look like how a lot of people's look. And this is your chance to show them a little bit more of who you are. So I think that is what they're looking for. And the thing to remember is there isn't one right answer of like, this is the perfect diversity statement. because there isn't one. I think there are lots of different ones that are great and can show how you're going to contribute to the firm and why. So it's a lot more about how you answer it than that it has to check like all these certain boxes, because not everyone's going to check the same boxes, and that's okay.
Right. I think people should view it as an opportunity. I know sometimes people
Yes.
think like, oh, this is such a hassle that I have to write this other thing, but it's really an opportunity for you to continue explaining why this is a good opportunity for you and why you're a good fit for them and like why they should hire you.
And that's what I think a cover letter is too. I think all of these things are more opportunity to give them more information about yourself. So use it wisely, and think about it that way, that it's an advantage for you.
Oh, for sure. Well, any final thoughts on this topic?
I'm going to go back to it needs to be less than one page and it needs to get to the point, because, again, I promise you that no one is reading a 3-page document and they're just skipping you. You're not going to even get in. Keep it short, even if you have to cut out things you think are important.
I think that's absolutely right. If you hand someone a 3-page diversity statement, they're going to be like, are you kidding me? And they're going to throw it in a pile and never look at it.
It's obnoxious.
Yeah, it's like people are busy. Do you understand the value of like 5 minutes of someone's time if they're a law firm partner? It's a huge amount of billable time.
Exactly. Keep it short, get to the point. That's my most important piece of advice.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
With that, we are out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, including on all of your various statements, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.